Most Jewish holidays have agricultural and historical elements, and some have political and spiritual. We Jews are very good at holidays that have complicated balances embedded in them. Holidays that are there to serve different purposes at different moments in time of our people. And this one, Hanukkah, is one that is certainly that way. On the surface, it's kind of a simple holiday, right? The good guys win over the bad guys. The oil is found. Yay, the good team wins. But that's just the superficial surface level. I have so much to say about this and not enough time tonight, as always, for me, because, brevity is not my strength. I want to share a few thoughts that I have in this moment that reflects the moment of history we're in, as we're in the middle of this historical holiday we're in. On one level, there's that simple message of Hanukkah. On the other hand, there are many complicated undersides to this story that many of us know, and I'm not going to spend too much time on them tonight. Historically, of course, the books that we have, the history that we have of this holiday focus far more on the military victory of this small group of guerrilla fighters against the major force of the Hellenized Syrians. And in fact, there is no mention of this holiday anywhere in the Jewish Bible. None. Zero. Zippo. Nothing in the Jewish Bible mentions the story of Hanukkah, which takes place around the year 165, 167 before the Common Era. We have a whole book in the Tanakh about the story of Esther. We have a whole section of the Gemara, of the Talmud about Esther, about the Megillah, but nothing about Hanukkah. So many reasons are given for this. I just want to explore a few, as I am so enmeshed, as we all are, embedded, surrounded by the moment in historical time we find ourselves right now. December 11th, 2020, in this United States of America, with the world watching what's happening here as we watch events in other places. But while we've watched different democracies collapse around the world, the impact of what happens here in the United States on the rest of the world is enormous. And so the world watches what happens here with particular attention. So nothing exists in the Bible about this story of Hanukkah. Nothing exists in the Mishnah, which are the 200 years of the beginning of the Common Era, that the rabbis were collecting their thoughts and developing their traditions and thinking through the impact of the biblical religion on the contemporary rabbinic Judaism. Nothing, nada. The only things we know about the historical elements of the holiday of Hanukkah come from books that are external. The history, they're called the 1 and 2 Maccabees, and the historical books of Josephus in their different forms. Those historical books tell the story, not the one that we would recognize so much, but some of the pieces of the story of the military struggle. But those historical books barely even mention the menorah and the light and the vials of oil and that particular part of the story. Almost nothing. A little bit. A little bit like our Al Hanisim prayer itself. If you read that Al Hanisim prayer, it's mostly about the military aspect, and I think there's maybe a sentence in there about the temple itself. But when the rabbis in the Tractate of Shabbat, on the 21st page, and you could look this up, Shabbat 21b, which is the second side of the Gemara, discuss what kind of candles can we use for Shabbat. And they spend a long time discussing the wicks and the oils and what kind of Shabbat candles you can use. And then they start discussing, okay, if that's what we could use for Shabbat, what do we use for Hanukkah? And they start talking about Hanukkah candles because they're talking about Shabbat candles. And then one rabbi says to the rest of the rabbis, hold on, what is Hanukkah? So first of all, that's a little weird, isn't it? That the rabbi would actually stop a discussion of other rabbis and say, what is Hanukkah? And we know from that, clearly Hanukkah was a very obscure and not well-known holiday. And there's a paragraph responding to what is Hanukkah, which has determined what we who are rabbinic Jews, in other words, we follow the tradition of those discussions. That's where the discussion about what happened in the temple becomes important. And in that text, which I was going to share tonight, but I'm not so good at sharing text and doing the whole screen thing. And I didn't do it early enough to get my wonderful TA Harold Levine well equipped to do it for me. In the text, in the answer to the question, what is Hanukkah? We get the description of the candle, of the oil in the temple not being enough, only having a little bit of oil. Why were they even in the temple? Because the temple had been dirtied. It had been made impure in the years of the struggle by the oppressing force, which not only was trying to annihilate the people at the time, but they took their holy places and made them dirty. And so people went in to clean up, to say, okay, we have this holy place back. How do we make it pure again? We know that things that are broken, that are repaired, that's where God's presence is. But in order to light the menorah, which was always a part of the temple, they needed enough oil. And we know that part of the story. And that's the part of the story that's told in the Talmud there. And that's where the discussion takes place. Well, do we light the candles 1 to 8 or 8 to 1? All of that takes place in this Talmudic discussion, far away from those historical books. And far away from, honestly, the time in which these things took place. The rabbis were doing a pivot. They, in these very few words, were giving meaning to this holiday the way that Abraham Lincoln, with his brief Gettysburg Address, shaped the meaning of the Civil War. Before the Gettysburg Address, there was a lot of confusion about what we were doing and why. And in that address, Abraham Lincoln made clear that what we were doing was about saving the Union itself. No more and no less. And that's the same thing that the rabbis do in this brief Talmudic section where they say, this is what Hanukkah is about. It's about celebrating the human spirit. And we are going to do that by lighting these candles. Almost no mention of the military victory. That is not what is significant, because ultimately military victories are short-lived. The Hashmonaim, who were the Maccabees who fought the Syrian Greeks, they lasted in power for less than 100 years. But we are still lighting the menorah 2,000 years later. It is in how we live our lives spiritually that will transcend political disasters. And that is the truth that we are learning now in the moment in time in which we find ourselves. When Joe Biden, on Inauguration Day, goes into the White House at noon, or after the inauguration, so later in the day, and there's going to have to be a lot of rededication of that house. A lot of cleaning up from the way it has been made impure over these years. Now you might say, how can I be speaking politically on a Shabbat? Hanukkah is a political holiday that observes a political activism, but it does it with this spiritual truth. How will we clean up? Not just go one day into the next, we who feel so dirtied by what's happened to our country. One way is to physically actually clean the places that have been made dirty. And I bring to you tonight a very brief few words about this very issue. The death rate from this COVID virus has reached 3,000 a day in this country. That's more than died at 9/11. It's more than were killed at Pearl Harbor. The one who now occupies the White House is a war criminal. And we have been abused by a government which cares not about human rights. And I say this on Human Rights Shabbat, when the Declaration of Human Rights was ratified by the United Nations. We have become a country in which corruption has reigned supreme. In August, since August to the day of to the moment of the inauguration. This administration will kill by death penalty 7 people. In August of this year, it had been 17 years since the death penalty was used for federal crimes in this country. Yesterday, a 40-year-old man was put to death by this country, by your tax dollars, by my tax dollars, by our government, for a crime, a heinous crime he had committed at the age of 18. His co-conspirators in this crime were under 18, so they did not receive the death penalty. He did. And Trump said back in August, we are going to go through those who are sitting on death row, and we are going to speed up all of those death penalties. And since he lost the election on November 3rd, he has said, I will make sure that those that I can execute will be executed before January 20th. This is unheard of. During this time between the election and an inauguration of a new president, usually executions are completely postponed. Next week, 2 more are scheduled to be executed by this government, by our country. There are many, many things we could point to that are ill in this country. Death penalty is one of them, and it's not owned only by the Republicans, of course, and it's been something I have fought against my whole life. In 1998, when Matthew Shepard was murdered as a gay young man and left tortured and beaten and with a little breath left in him, tied up to a fence in Laramie, Wyoming, to be found the next day barely alive, taken to a hospital, and he died. Many, many in the gay community called for the death of his murderers. Richard Burns and I, Richard was then the executive director of the Gay Community Center, issued a public letter from the 2 of us against the death penalty, even for the murderers of Matthew Shepard. It's not about innocence or guilt. It's about what a civilized country does to those who are guilty and to those who need to be punished. It is an outrage that this country still exercises the death penalty, and it is an outrage that this president is doing it even in a moment in which others would have suspended that right. Needless to say, this Supreme Court has allowed these executions to continue and have refused to stay any of these executions. We are facing a time of rededication. Chanukah Habayit, that's what this holiday is called. Chanukah Habayit is the dedication of the place. A bayit is literally a house, but it's also the place in which God exists, and all of us are living in our batim, in our houses. We are called upon this holiday to rededicate our space. Our personal space was a mikdash ma'at, the holy space of our homes in which we've lived and worked over these last 9 months. We have to rededicate them. It's not enough that there will be a new president in the White House. Thank God, and we will see some great relief from that, because we will be able to start to rededicate by cleaning up the corruption, by cleaning up some of the evil and the fascism that has become the law of our land. But we must remember, it's never going to be time to let up on our work to strengthen the roots of this country, to figure out what are we going to do with the hate that exists. How are we going to transform the language and the threats and the hatred that has become such a part of our world? We all must, on this Hanukkah, when we light the lights, dedicate ourselves to continuing to spread light, to not give up, to not see that the time is over, to be able to look right into the evil that exists, and to be able to say, I am going to continue to light those lights. As I said in the beginning of our service, we are like those on an ark who are in the middle of a tsunami. And we're hearing some echoes that there might be dry land ahead. There might be a vaccine that, should it be able to be effective and distributed properly, and enough people take it, will help us get off this ark and back onto dry land. There might be a new government that will be able to help us. There will be a new government that will be able to help us. There might be dry land ahead. To get from here to there, we must maintain hope. Be optimistic even when we don't want to be. And I know what that feels like. Because we have to keep strengthening each other, not for the short term. We have to make sure this Hanukkah is about the spiritual message of these days, not just the historical and political ones. We have to make sure the message of spreading light is more important and significant for the rest of our lives and the lives of those who will come after us. As those words of the song that we started with said in Banu Choshech, each of us is one small light, but together we make a mighty light. Let's keep standing up and being brave for the things we believe in, but do it with humility, do it with love, do it with light. Let us make sure in these days and weeks ahead of us, we continue insisting on a world that is full of justice and love and lots of light. Let us continue being the reason that another human being believes in the goodness of humanity. Light that light. Be full of joy, because joy is an act of spiritual and political resistance. Reach out to others who need your light a little bit in order to light theirs. And let's continue to be a people who believes that no matter what, the light will continue forever. Shabbat Shalom, Chag Sameach, and join me as we sing some words from Hallel